welcome to this webinar where we are looking at why organizations need to look beyond engagement. And when you measure engagement, what you see is the aftermath of what has already happened within the organization. So everything you measure is already too late when you start focusing on engagement measures. I'm not saying it does not have a place, but what I'm trying to say is we need to start looking at the whole measurement philosophy deeper. In this webinar, I'm going to be talking about the model that we would like to introduce and how you could start using it to shape how you think about performance and how you think about measuring anything that relates to performance. Okay, now, in my experience, I have seen intelligent organizations with great leaders, capable leaders, and they all want to succeed. Yet, there are some organizations that do better than others. Why? I want you to think about it. Now, if we are looking at an organization, right, I would say that it is like a field. And you can see the field on the left and the right. One is flourished, one is struggled. Now, if you're looking at organizations that have got the same climate, same conditions, one is thriving and one is not, no one is going to say the harvest is bad. No one is going to blame the harvest. They're going to ask, what really happened to the soil? I want you to actually hold that thought. What really happened to that soil? Because that is where we will be talking about how the shift in thinking needs to happen for us to think about performance and how we measure it. Okay, before I jump into further slides, I just want to do a quick poll. So what I would do is basically ask you to complete this poll. Please take your phones out and you can scan the QR code and it will take probably less than 10 seconds for you to complete it. The question I want you to answer is given in the screen, right? So I'm going to give you 10 seconds for you to complete it. I want you to pause and think about your own organization. I want you to think if you've launched something new or introduced a new process, changed the system, brought in training, or pushed a new target. Have you seen the problem that you tried to solve come back again? Or a few months later, you kind of solve the same issues? And this happens more often than leaders admit. The reason is usually that the initiative wasn't bad. It is because the initiative addressed the visible symptom, not the underlying condition that created it. So let's get into this poll. I'm going to give you 10 seconds. So let's start. Okay, I hope you've completed it. Okay, let's see what you guys are saying. Interesting. There is a perfect balance in this case. Generally, I see a lot of people saying frequently more than occasionally. And there is no right or wrong answer to this because, as I mentioned earlier, we are measuring the symptom, not what is causing it, right? So if you have to dive deeper, let's start with a different take on why we are looking at the wrong thing. Now, when we talk about performance, performance is just an outcome, right? It is the outcome that an organization gets when employees perform better. Note the word employees perform. The performance is the outcome that is generated when the managers, the leaders help the employees to become the best version of themselves, right? But in general terms, if we look at the terms that we use, we are managing it. Management is different than nourishing and cultivating. There is a subtle difference there. When you're trying to manage it, what you're trying to do is control it. But when you're trying to cultivate it, what you're trying to do is give all the opportunity for the individual to thrive. Now, this has been going on for quite some time, because if you look at it, the management thinking behind this is always management, right? It is not about getting the best out of people to perform. And that is the core misunderstanding about business. Performance is not the starting point. It is the harvest, as I mentioned earlier. And it is the visible result of the invisible conditions that existed long before the number appeared on the balance sheet or spreadsheet or your dashboard, right? So we need to start looking at what can we do differently to get people becoming the best version of themselves. Now, when you talk about management, that basically changes the dialogue, right? When leaders feel pressure, they often respond by increasing control. Oh, I'm not hitting the numbers, so I need to do this. I need to do this. So you start putting a lot of controls in place. You start building more reports in place. Now you have meetings to see how you can improve. You need more approvals. You're tightening the sales process or the buying process or the investment. You bring in more dashboards. Now it feels sensible, right? You want to try to manage things. So you are trying to control, right? Because you are saying by controlling, I am reducing the uncertainty. But you remember one thing, human beings do not always experience control as support. Because when you're trying to control something, it is seen as something that the individual sees that, oh, they don't trust me or my ability. So that's why they are controlling it. And when that happens, when trust erodes, fear increases. And when fear increases, what happens? Either you try and do more, you get to a point where you're burnt out, or your contribution reduces and you start becoming a average performer and a poor performer, and you switch off. So this kind of becomes like a control loop. Now I want you to think about what happens when things go brilliantly in an organization. When things go brilliantly, everyone gets bonus, everyone is lauded, everything and more training programs are provided, people are nourished, and so on and so forth. Now, when the economy turns in the opposite direction for the company, when performance is not there, or when there is pressure to hit numbers, what happens? The first thing that gets cut is the people budget. People training gets cut, then people get cut. And what really amazes me is after reducing a few, people or a few hundreds or thousands of headcount, depending on the organization that you lead, suddenly you show bottom line contribution as a stable one. And you pat yourselves on the back and take more bonuses. It kind of does not resonate with how we should be looking at metrics and performance, right? So if you're trying to manage, what you're trying to do is you're trying to actually bring in control, which instills fears. When fear is instilled, it reduces contribution. So I can hear people asking, okay, so why are they, what do you mean by this? Okay, what is the alternate way of doing this? Fear not. There's a much better way to get things done to help people become the better version of themselves. Now, I want you to think about the question that I started asking in the beginning of the presentation. Why do organizations struggle? Right? So if you go into a hospital and if you're saying, I've got chest pain, you would expect the doctor to investigate you, right? they would not just go, okay, he's got chest pain, I'll prescribe aspirin and off you go. And that's it. The issue is chest pain is not the illness. It is the evidence that something deeper is happening, right? And when they try and do the tests, they try and understand what is really wrong. Now, businesses also work exactly in the same way. And you see declining profits, poor engagement, high staff turnover, or unhappy customers, they're all just symptoms, right? But what do organizations do? They spend their time treating these symptoms instead of understanding what is the real cause. Yeah. So you have a lot of dashboards. Organizations are notorious to creating dashboards. Now, what it means is they just tell you what is happening at that point in time, right? It does not tell you what is happening behind, right? Every business has got a profit as a metric, revenue as a metric, customer satisfaction as a metric, employee engagement, which is where we started, which is where this webinar is all about. Which, why do you measure engagement? Because you want people to become productive. So productivity metrics. Then you measure cash flow. But they are all useful measures. I'm not saying it is wrong to measure these, but they have one thing in common. They tell you what has happened. None of these metrics tell you why it happened, right? They're like the dashboard on the car. If the warning light comes on, that particular thing starts blinking, right? Which means the dashboard has done its job. But you don't start fixing the warning light. You go and look at what is causing the warning light, right? So as an organization, we have the responsibility to look at things which are deeper. Now, if you look at what is really happening, the insight that is provided via the dashboard needs to be looked at by leaders to diagnose what is actually causing this. So by measuring engagement, if the engagement is low or is that the metric that you rely on, you go deeper. You try and understand what is causing this engagement. Yes, we talk about manager relationships and training and development. Those are things you do. But below that, you need to understand why did they feel that way. That is where the conversation needs to start. Now, before we go to the next section, I would like to actually offer another poll, right? This one is about understanding what is the biggest challenge in the organization that you're facing currently. I want you to answer it honestly. Don't think about what should be true. Think about what is true, right? What is the biggest challenge that's consuming your leadership team today? I'll give you 10 seconds to complete this. So let's start. Okay. So let's see. Oh, wow. Okay. No wonder you have come to understand what you are looking at, getting people engaged. Now, we did speak about engagement as a metric that you bring in when things have happened, right? So you go beyond that. You go and understand what needs to be done differently. If you remember, I started off with an analogy of a land. Now, I want to extend that to the entire stretch of the presentation, right? A great leader or a great manager is like a farmer. They don't manage harvest. They don't manage what can be done, but they manage what they can do. They actually create the right kind of climate, or they cultivate the field. So as a leader, you are responsible for cultivating the right climate, the right culture for your organization. And if you do that, it has a massive impact on performance, right? So let's go back and look at this. If we have the same employee who's struggling in one company, quits and goes into another company and thrives, is it the employee's issue or the organization's cultural issue? Nobody blames the seed when it comes to farming, right? But we always are quick to blame our team when people don't perform. We blame people before we examine the environment in which these people are expected to succeed. If they don't have the right climate, they don't have the right culture, can you get the best out of them? That's something that you need to think about, right? Okay, now, sorry, it's just calm. So before I actually worked in leadership development, my job, I started my career as an engineer. And my job was not to replace faulty boards. You know, I tried to look at engineering as the foundation for whatever I have been doing with organization, right? My job was not to replace faulty boards. It was to understand why they failed, right? I learned to mentally trace the flow of current and in the circuits to understand where there are weak points and where the system broke down and why the system broke down. That way of thinking never left me. Years later, I realized that organizations also begin the same way. See, failures begin long before it becomes visible, right? So, trying to understand the current that goes within the organization to create that failure is what you need to start looking at. So, when a business underperforms, what do? We replace people, we replace systems, or restructure departments, or introduce new initiatives. Now, but my engineering brain kept thinking and asking the same question again. What is the invisible condition that created the failure in the first place? Because visible failures almost never happen themselves. Something breaks or cracks, that fracture has been happening over a period of time. What you saw was the end result. It was not what triggered it. So when you measure customer experience or customer satisfaction or employee engagement, the result is what has happened over a period of time. It does not tell you why it has happened. And that is where we need to start looking at things differently, right? So this is me when I was young. This is me getting my PhD. So when I did my PhD, I was actually researching about how organizations value people. Like when you look at someone, you either like them or you don't like them. I was trying to find out what are you trying to do within your head to understand and evaluate the person. I explored cognitive mapping, management thinking, behavioral science, psychometrics, neurology, multiple fields, multiple perspectives, economics, even financial management accounting to look at this particular problem. And when I brought multiple things together, I realized the problem is much more simple than what we make it to be. I'm not oversimplifying it. Don't get me wrong. It is a complex subject. We still are trying to understand how we all behave, our brain, and so on and so forth. But there is a simple way to start looking at it. And that happened when I presented my first set of data to one of my professors, and he listened to my research and he smiled and he said, "Oh, okay. So now you're going to ask companies to measure how employees feel." Everyone laughed, but something inside me clicked. You know, that comment changed my career because I realized he had accidentally described exactly what I was trying to achieve, not because happiness was the goal. In fact, he didn't even say how people feel. He said, "Do you want to measure how happy your people are?" So that was not the goal. You are happy, you feel happy when things work in the right way for you and for your team so that you can become the best version of yourselves, right? Performance is the goal, but perhaps the way people experience an organization determines how they perform within it. I want you to think about this. How people experience an organization determines how they perform within it. That was the question I was trying to answer. And that became an obsession for me, right? Excuse me. Engineering actually taught me to diagnose invisible causes, right? Leadership taught me that people are not machines. And my research showed me that fear sits beneath much of human behavior. Customer experience taught me that feelings shape decisions. Suddenly, as I mentioned earlier, all these things started converging, and it converged into a single big idea. What do I mean by that? I went back again to my engineering roots. Let me introduce you to an idea that completely changed the way I think about organizations. And hopefully, this will change how you see your teams and your colleagues at work. Now, we all use computers, right? Smartphones or anything. But every computer has something called a BIOS, which is a basic input output system, right? No one has seen it because it operates quietly in the background. Before your Windows kicks in, when you switch on, it checks the basic health of the organization. Before any application starts running, it checks if everything that is needed to support all these applications are working, right? And the BIOS actually prepares the computer for everything that follows. If the BIOS is not functioning perfectly or correctly, it doesn't matter how sophisticated you've got the software, it is not going to work because the entire system will fail. When I understood how BIOS works, it's something stuck within me. Human beings are something remarkably similar. Long before we speak, long before we make decisions, long before we demonstrate, and certainly long before we experience a conversation, how we respond to feedback, how we build relationships, and ultimately how much of our potential we choose to contribute is influenced by what happens at a very, very deep level. The remarkable thing is that we never actually see this operating system. We only see its outputs. And that, I believe, is one of the greatest blind spots in modern leadership, right? So I realized that organizations have an invisible operating system. Just as the computer has a BIOS that quietly prepares everything before the operating system even starts, every organization has got a human basic input output system. We don't see it directly, we only see the outputs, right? We can call it culture. Organization is nothing but a collection of people coming together to do something. And the collection of people, how they behave, is the performance that comes out as a result of the behavior. But how they feel as a group is shaped by the culture, which is shaped by the leadership, and so on and so forth. So we need to start looking at it slightly differently. Just like every computer has a BIOS, every organization has a bias. Every human being has a bias. Long before the behavior becomes visible, long before performance appears, it's long before engagement surveys or customer satisfaction, every human being is interpreting every experience through an invisible operating system, right? And that operating system determines how we experience work. So we need to be mindful of that and then start looking at what can leaders do differently to address that. Okay, so as human beings, we don't behave according to policy. We behave according to experience. And this was probably the biggest shift in my own thinking. For years, we have tried to improve behavior, right? Behavior has been the gold standard because you've got psychometrics and a billion-dollar industry around psychometrics where we measure behaviors and try and use the behaviors to build teams to change how we approach work and performance. Then we have engagement. Again, it's probably a billion-dollar industry or slightly less. I'm not sure. I need to go back and check. But that again is the result of what you have decided. Behavior or engagement is not where the story begins. It's where it ends. Experience is where it actually begins, right? Now, think about your own day. Something happens. Let's say you're going out, trying to take your car, and you have an idiot who actually tries and jumps, and you actually hit the brakes. You get flustered. That's the first thing you see in the morning. You interpret it, and that creates an emotion, right? And that emotion influences the decision you make. You either say, you know what, it's my day starting. I'm not going to relax. I'm going to react. I'm not going to react. I'm going to be relaxed. Or you could choose to react. You could shout or honk or say something, that decision then becomes behavior. Every repeated behavior in an organization, as I mentioned earlier, becomes culture. And enough culture becomes organizational performance, because that is the way we do things around here. That's how people justify the culture. So you can see how culture can influence performance, but how culture gets influenced by the behavior, which then influenced by the decision that we have taken to demonstrate the behavior, which is influenced by how we feel, the emotion that we underwent, and how we have interpreted the whole thing, right? Performance is simply the last domino to fall. Yeah. So if you look at this, if you want to change the last domino, which is performance, you don't start there, right? You will start with the first one. You'll have to start with experience. Now, an interesting thing happened when I completed my PhD. As I told you, I was trying to understand why and how we value people. So I was trying to do regressive mapping and all that stuff. I don't want to bore you with this stuff. But when I ultimately distilled it to why we do things and what triggers that evaluation is basically at the core of everything sits fear, right? Of course, I looked at multiple industries, multiple leaders, different roles, but it kept pointing to fear, right? Now, if you look at fear, what do I mean by that? It could be fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of missing out, fear of losing status, fear of uncertainty, fear of looking stupid, fear of making mistakes, fear of not being seen as brave, fear of, not being part of the group. So fear quietly shapes organizational behavior far more than most leaders realize. But I can't go back and say, you know what, control your fear, you will all become brilliant and performing. That is probably the right thing to do, but doesn't justify my PhD, right? So what I wanted to do was look at it slightly differently. Now, before I do that, I want you to answer this particular poll based on how you think it happens in your organization, right? What creates the most fear inside your organization? So, I mean, again, there is no right or wrong answer here, right? So please feel free to complete it. Okay, now let's look at the results. Wow. Okay, I don't want to say a lot of people are worried about this. Is not something that I see uncommon. People say, leaders say, oh, we want people to fail and then we want them to learn from their mistakes. But how many leaders and managers actually build that into a sustainable practice? That is where I see a lot of issues and a lot of challenges. When you have a fear of failure, what happens? A, fear. Let's take that specific example. You don't want to fail. So what do? If you're being asked to do something, sometimes if you don't know what to do, there's a fear of you appearing stupid. So you stop asking that question, right? What should I do correctly? So if you overcome that fear and say, you know what, I want to understand what is happening. But if you don't have the right capabilities or the competence to execute it, then what happens? So are you ready to accept that you're not having the right kind of competence? So that fear kicks in. So even if you say, oh, okay, I will go ahead and accept that I'm not competent enough, that means I might be asking for a training or I might be short circuiting my promotion, right? So, but assuming that you do that and you say, I get trained and you go and do it, and if things fail, now it's not the fear of the individual, it's how the manager and the company and the leadership react. If they are not happy about you failing, you will know that you should not be taking that risk. So you've already made the decision not to be part of it. So that is going to reflect on your behavior. So when someone is asking the team to take responsibility, no hands go up. Everyone tries to duck. And that is where fear has a major role to play, right? I'm just giving you one example, but there are so many ways which we could look at this. So what can we do differently? What can we actually focus on if you want to get over fear? How can you build a culture that does not rely on fear? And from my research, I identified these three components: trust, empathy, dignity. It's not independently, it's got to be working together, right? So, for example, we all buy things online because from Amazon without thinking, because we trust the platform, right? But when it comes to buying things or doing things with an individual, for example, if you have to go and meet a doctor or a surgeon, we trust the surgeon in his or her capability to perform the surgery. But if they don't have the right kind of empathy, they're always looking at the screen and typing, and they're not listening to you. Or when they don't treat you with respect, what happens? We start feeling that this is the wrong decision that we have taken. When we start doubting that, fear kicks in. And when fear kicks in, suddenly your performance goes through the roof. If you're going to see a surgeon, probably try to second guess the surgeon, and that kind of creates a loop. If you remember earlier, we spoke about the loop, right? That happens automatically within our ecosystem, right? So if I am to look at, fear on one end of the spectrum, you can see that trust, dignity, and empathy have to be working harmoniously to overcome fear. If we don't do that, then it becomes a difficult proposition for fear not to exist in the organization. Now, if I look at this, looking at fear, I see fear is basically is the root cause for your resistance. Now, this is where my engineering background comes back. Electricity already possesses potential. The resistance actually determines how much of current actually passes. Human beings, we all have potential, right? But fear creates that resistance. And leadership, as I told you earlier, they don't create potential, they reduce resistance, right? The resistance can be lowered if the culture of cultivation exists rather than management exists. Leadership does not create potential, it reduces resistance. I think this is one of the most important ideas in this webinar, because we will be looking at this, and then from here, we can see how we can start looking at numbers and measurement differently. Okay, so if we are to look at the potential and the contribution, we know the potential already exists. You have hired someone because you believe that they have the potential to do what they are expected to do, right? So the question is not whether your people have it. The question is how much of it actually reaches the organization. Because no one gets up in the morning brushing their teeth saying, I want to make my manager's life miserable today. I want to underperform. But when they walk through that door, someone or something is preventing them from realizing their true potential. So that's where you need to start thinking about performance and contribution. Now, we spoke about experience, right? We've been talking about it for quite some time. Now, experience impacts engagement. This is what we said. We also spoke about fear and how it impacts the outcomes, right? So we've been talking about in bits and pieces across the spectrum. But what I want to do is now introduce a proper structured way to look at how you can start looking at things differently and measuring things differently. Now, this basically is the complete framework, right? This is the human bios model, which influences experience, okay? So you can look at trust, empathy, and dignity are the three things that, if they are in place, they balance fear and trigger the right kind of emotions. And when you have the right kind of emotions, it shapes your experience. You feel satisfied, you feel committed, you feel loyal, right? Now, we know that, again, satisfaction, commitment, and loyalty have to work in tandem to get you engaged to demonstrate the right kind of behavior. Now, when you decide that you are satisfied, when you feel you're satisfied, committed, and loyal, you then take a decision to engage with the organization. So your behavior starts reflecting your decision that you have taken, which then impacts performance. So performance, you see, appears at the very end. It's not the beginning. Engagement and behavior are just one level below. You need to start going deeper than this. So what I normally see in organizations is this. They measure 10%. They measure revenue. They measure profit. They measure productivity. They measure customer satisfaction and employee engagement. But if you look at what happens below, the 90% is where we need to start looking at. We need to start looking at, does my employee trust his manager or the team or the leader or the company? Are we empathetic? Do we treat them with dignity and respect? What is the human experience currently? How is it then manifesting as behavior? Everything organizations normally measure, as I told you, sits above the waterline. Everything that creates that measures sits below it. And we as a business spend most of our time measuring what is above the visible iceberg, and very few deliberately strengthen the invisible human bios. I want to say, dive slightly in this case. We look at AI. Everyone is talking about AI can do this, AI can replace this, but that is just the tip. What is the true potential? We need to start looking at it differently. The same applies to human beings, right? Now, we did this. I would like to talk about a simple case study where we tried to understand what a customer journey looks like in an organization, right? This was an organization where the company wanted to understand why people who walked into a store or their stores didn't buy. So we stood within the store, collecting the data, observing them when they came out. We asked them questions. We looked at people who walked in, didn't buy, asked them questions, asked them how they felt. So we did the whole lot of things. Based on that, we said, okay, there are certain key things when you could actually make quick money by installing vending machines for accessories. You could actually have a click and drop facility so they can actually drop their the stuff. I'm not going to be revealing what the organization is, but it is a big company. And we could also have, help virtual or physical in some part of the store to help them understand and answer questions. That changed their revenue model significantly. The revenues went through the roof as the result of a few changes by understanding how their customers went through the whole buying process emotionally. All right. So this organization did a phenomenal job. And it is brilliant that a lot of organizations are trying to do this when it comes to customers. Now, when it comes to employees, they why do I have not seen many organizations map employee journey, right? Employees experience uncertainty, they experience frustration, they experience achievement, they experience recognition, they experience disappointment exactly in the same way a customer does. We are all in to measure customer journey, customer behavior, customer experience, and map them. If experience drives customer behavior, surely experience drives employees' behavior too, right? Because we are employees in one organization and customers in another. So why are we not doing this? Why are we not focusing on experience? That is the question that actually would be the starting point for this conversation. Now, I want to actually ask you to complete this small poll again. What do you measure these days within your organization? Just complete this poll. Let's see. Okay, so let's see what you guys have said. Oh, wow. Okay. Not surprising. When I say people are measuring employee experience, I mean, we have helped organizations measure employee experience, but generally they don't measure employee experience, right? You can see that someone has just added. Yeah, so someone is measuring employee experience. So you can see, uh, uh, but the numbers speak for themselves, right? Emphasis is more on customer experience. We measure customer experience, we measure employee engagement. Can you see the difference in the language there? Experience is deeper, engagement is surface level. Now, I'm sure you've all heard this phrase, employees are our assets, right? And that's a phrase that we all keep hearing. If it's an asset, what are we doing to leverage and get the best of the asset rather than depreciate it? By measuring engagement, are we investing in the asset or depreciating the asset? I want you to think about it. Now, we have worked with a lot of organizations where we have actually helped shape both employee and customer journeys, right? When we do this, we have seen a significant increase in their performance. So what happens when the human bios, which is the root cause of all this, becomes unhealthy? When the employees don't feel right, what happens? That's what we will look at. I just want to recap what we've been talking about so far, right? We talked about employee engagement, we talked about experience, we talked about fear, we talked about the three levers that an organization needs to pull to overcome fear, which can then manifest as satisfaction, commitment, and loyalty. We said companies measure customer experience but don't measure employee experience. We try and leverage, pull levers from a behavior point of view and an engagement point of view when it comes to employees, which then impacts your performance. Now, when I started the presentation, I said that there are underlying causes. It's which causes this performance or the lack of, right? Which is the human bias. Now, when you look at it as an organization, as a leader, where do we see this? What are the symptoms that we see when the human bias becomes unhealthy? Because every unhealthy operating system leaves clues, right? So when you see a computer BIOS fail, you will see it straight away. The computer will not boot, right? But in an organization, it doesn't happen straight away. So we see the systems slowly failing. We see people getting frustrated. Maybe when the BIOS gets corrupted, it can happen. So BIOS failure is a different one. BIOS getting corrupted is a different one. If a computer BIOS gets corrupted, applications will start failing. It will start becoming slow. Things might get, things that were supposed to happen without efforts takes more time, and so on and so forth. Apply this to the human BIOS. Start saying the same thing. And this leaves fingerprints in a computer, and it leaves fingerprints in an organization when the human BIOS fails. You never see it directly, right? But you always see the effects of what really went wrong. Now, when we talk about the 5 ways, when we talk about how it manifests, I have seen that it manifests only in 5 different ways. I mean, this I have worked with more than 100 organizations, big and small, across countries, and no matter what industry, no matter what size, no matter what country, when the human BIOS is weakened, the symptoms appears only in these 5 places. It's not sometimes, it's always, right? What are these? These are the symptoms. You see, it impacts the systems. It impacts the leadership. It impacts the customer experience. It impacts the strategy. That manifests as strategy. Impacts employees. So I call these as the bottlenecks, right? They are not independent problems. They are the different expressions of the same underlying condition where the human BIOS is failing, and that's causing this. Think of this like a warning in your dashboard, right? When we spoke about the dashboard, right? We said when the dashboard lights up, you don't go and fix that issue. You try and understand what is really causing that. Don't look at the warning light. Look at what is causing the problem and then reveal it. Now, when strategy fails, what happens? Clarity disappears, right? Trust begins to decline. People start asking questions. Assumptions replace conversations. Everyone thinks they are working towards the same goal till they discover they're not, right? So I've seen organizations where, this clearly summarizes that. Every individual is working hard, but the problem was not the effort, it was alignment. People were rowing harder in this case, but not together. So lack of clarity from a strategic perspective will never get you anywhere. So you can't say it is a strategy problem. It is a people problem, which is manifesting as a strategy problem. When we talk of a people problem, it could be a leader problem, or it could be an employee problem. Now, before I move on, I would actually like you to complete another poll. I know I'm asking a lot of questions, but you hopefully would see the value behind each of this. Now, I want you to look at the question and say which one sounds most familiar, right? Just click on the thing that is relevant to you. Again, there are no right answers or wrong answers. I just want you to reflect on it. Yeah? Okay. So let's see what the results are. Come on. Yeah. Okay. So this is a common thing, isn't it? Lack of clarity means lack of change in the direction that you're going. You want to do something today, suddenly change things because you think it's not. It's about believing in what you do. And that belief comes when the leaders know what they're doing. And when they know what they're doing, but if they are not seeing results, then fear kicks in. Are we doing the right thing? You start questioning when you start having the conversations. So suddenly things start going in a different direction, right? So you can see this. I'm just showing this to show you that although it manifests as a strategy bottleneck, that bottleneck is caused by people, right? The second thing, primarily, when it comes to strategy, the natural one that comes in is leadership. So when you are a leader or a manager and you build an organization which basically is more of management, which is about control, which is about fear, then you become, from a leader, you become a dealer, right? So you start controlling. And when the leaders become controllers, performance automatically goes through the roof or goes out of the door. Most of the time, it goes out of the door. It goes through the roof if you have a burning platform where people work hard, and it does work for some time. And what happens is eventually people get burnt out. People start leaving. Performance starts going down eventually. So when control takes center stage, fear becomes the dominant factor. Leaders build performance breaking systems which impact the organization's progress, right? Instead of asking questions, leaders start giving answers, right? Instead of developing people, they start checking in on people, micromanagement. Instead of cultivating capability, they actually become the bottleneck. And if you're a smaller organization, this is something that I see. This is where the leader is. They try to do everything, try and carry everyone because they don't trust people to do their own thing. And if you're a leader who's got issues, ask, are you actually doing this? Does it come back to you? If it comes back to you, it's not a leadership issue. It's a human bias problem. What is it that you are doing, saying, or your team is doing, saying, that is making people feel that they cannot do things on their own? What is causing that fear to take that responsibility? What is causing that action or inaction? You need to ask that question, right? So I'll give you a simple example. I started working with a small business. I mean, when I say small business, it's a sub £1 million turnover. Almost a year ago, he was working 6 days and sometimes 7 days a week. He had a team of 20 people, but he was reluctant to let go. And and he wanted to grow the business and he wasn't. And he's been in this stage for 8, 9 years now. His turnover has been almost constant because he was working in the business rather than on the business. So when I started working with him, I started showing him the impact of his actions or inactions. I started showing him how don't get me wrong, he's a very gentle guy, very pleasantable, very approachable, but he was controlling the organization in a way that he did not realize the way he was actually exercising control, right? So we started working with him and we started showing him how he was instilling fear by his actions and words and by him being there. We showed him that him not being there does not mean that things would not get done. We got him to do some basic exercises. And now, these days, I mean, within a year, his turnover is almost doubled. I won't say doubled, it's almost doubled because he has taken time off. And the thing is, we actually showed him that he needs an additional X number of customers to add to his Y number of customers to double his turnover. And that was not 2 times what his existing customer base was. So when he took time off business, we started showing him how he could do that. And now he works 4 days. He's groomed 2 people who can potentially become the heads of the organization. He works 4 days a week now. And he even took a holiday, 3 days. And he told me that when he went on a holiday, he didn't take his phone, switch his phone on, nor did he switch on his laptop. His wife was surprised. She said, "Are you okay?" So when you start looking at things slightly differently as a leader and recognize how you could change, performance can just go through the roof. Right? Now, when you have a team of people, when you don't treat them with the respect, with the trust that they are expected to, have, or the right kind of empathy, then dignity disappears. And dignity disappears, contribution follows. People don't disengage overnight, right? You don't see the engagement, as I told you, is the final straw that broke the camel's back. People withdraw gradually. First, they stop sharing ideas. Then they stop challenging assumptions. Eventually, they stop caring. And we call it disengagement, But the individual calls it survival because we go back to that fear. Remember that. So we need to start looking at how can we, as a leader, ensure that our people are the best version of themselves. Now, if I'm just having this, if every person in your organization has a light, when they come in, they have a light. Leadership is not about switching that light on. Leadership is about protecting it. Otherwise, it slowly extinguishes it. So as a leader, are you protecting the light that employees have? That's the question I want you to answer. Now, this is the last poll. If people could speak openly, what would they say? Okay, let's see. Come on. Boom. I've not seen. Okay. You don't know the priorities. Interesting, isn't it? It is very interesting when you see what you see here. Okay. We then come to the fourth manifestation, which is customer. Customer experience mirrors employee experience. We talked about employee journey and customer journey, right? So how an employee feels then reflects on how their actions, their mindset, and their experience is, which then transfers into how they treat their customers, their experience, their perception, and their loyalty. So if you want to get great customer experience, start focusing on providing great employee experience. Start mapping and managing your employees' emotional journey, right? I can give you a simple example. I'm going to be quick because I've not been speaking for quite some time. This is a case study. We worked with a network of gyms where we measured how employees felt and how customers felt. Then we saw a direct correlation between how they felt, employees felt, and how customers felt, and the impact it was having on the revenue per square feet. When we changed the employee experience, we actually showed a significant enhancement in the revenue per square feet of the gym through customer experience, right? The last bit that we have is systems. Now, people say, oh, that system is wrong, this system is wrong. People are now talking about AI, right? AI comes in and AI actually is used to, people are talking about replacing people with AI. That is bonkers. I mean, yes, AI is a great tool, but as I mentioned earlier, it is not just about replacing people. It is about releasing the human contribution. If AI can do the mundane things that your employees are currently doing, then employees can become better version of themselves. So don't position AI as a tool that will replace them, which is what you're doing. So the conversation is about fear, but position AI as a tool that can help release quality time for your employees. That is a nurturing conversation. See, that is where organizations are missing the trick. They are talking about AI replacing people. Maybe, yes, at some point in time, we will have robots and AI doing everything. But we need to pause and think. If we have an efficient organization which manufactures everything through robots and AI, where there are no employees, then where will we go as employees, as individuals? What would we do? What is the work that we would do? So if we have to purchase those efficiently manufactured things, we need to have money. Where is money going to come from? So where is the balance going to be achieved? That's food for thought. I'm not going to dive into that, but I'm actually getting you to think about it. So don't position AI as a replacer. Position AI as an enabler. Position systems as a way to do things effectively and efficiently rather than making it difficult for people, right? And that's something that I see in organizations time and again. Now, if you look at the complete model now, you can see that we spoke about fear, which then translates into this, which then translates into satisfaction, commitment, and behavior, which then reflects on the behavior and engagement. And this engagement or the lack of it comes through people, comes through customers, comes through leaders, comes through systems, or comes through strategy, which ultimately impacts performance. So, what does your organization look like? Where do you start? If I were you, I would start by understanding what are the 5 bottlenecks that we see. What can we do to change this from here to here to here? If it is a people bottleneck, I would probably ask a simple question. You don't have to make it complicated, right? Are my employees afraid of speaking their minds out? Will they trust me? Am I empathetic to their needs? Am I treating them with dignity and respect? Don't pat yourself in your back when they give you 80, 80, and 80. What that tells me is 2 out of 10 times they don't trust you. 2 out of 10 times you don't demonstrate empathy. 20% of the time you don't treat them with respect. How would you behave if you are not treated properly with dignity 20% of the time that you interact with your boss? Think about it. How would you behave when 20% of the time conversations that you have with your boss, you don't trust your boss? So think of a sensible way to then market. I'm not saying everyone has to give 100, but the sweet spot lies between 90 to 100 for these 3 things, and fear to be less and less. So that's the balance. If you remember, if you can just build 4 questions, just 4 questions around that, and then start changing that, you can then start changing this. Now, what I would suggest is we've got a bottleneck quiz which focuses on these 5 areas. You can complete it. It's free. You can scan the QR code. Takes probably 3 minutes. It is not a slider scale. It is more about the problems that you think you're facing currently, right? So you can look at it, answer it, And when you complete it, just need to add your email and your name and your company's name, and voila, you get a report which gives you a clear action plan that you can focus and get things done for the next 90 days. Hopefully, you found this session useful. And if you want to get in touch with me, do connect with me on LinkedIn, because I'm sure most of you came through LinkedIn. And this is Raghavan signing off. Thank you.